Welcome back to On the Fly. Today we're recapping Day 5 of the Women's World Championship happening in České Budějovice, Czechia. So, hop into today starting with the scores from today's game, starting with a 3-0 victory for Norway over Hungary. Now, this was a game that I would best characterize as the storyline of this year's tournament for these two teams, where you see Norway just chipping away, trying to find mistakes, holding on for as long as they can before eventually finding a goal and basically trying to take back control of the game from there on. For Hungary, storyline of this tournament has been their inability to score goals, and in this one, you can see the score. It's a 0 because Hungary lost again today, 3-0. So, for these two teams, I mean, it's a tough one, right? Especially for Hungary, who's, in my eyes, has dominated play at moments against some of the best teams at this tournament. You think about who they've already played with, Japan and Sweden, who those two teams have shown themselves to be real contenders at this tournament, and just missing that little goal-scoring touch that could put them that much over the edge. And especially in that Japan game where we saw them, this close from being in the conversation of being in the top 2, or maybe even top 3 of the standings. But there is still a chance for Hungary. We'll talk about the what-ifs a little bit later on here in the video. But the most important thing to remember here is for Norway, they get their first win since I believe it was 1994. I know we have it in a little bit later of a segment, but the history for Norway at this tournament. So congrats to Norway. Obviously, it's a big win for them. They move along in the standings here. They give themselves an opportunity to make it at least another game here, to give themselves a shot. They will play Sweden coming up. Once again, we'll get to all the what-ifs a little bit later, so I'm trying not to get too ahead of myself here. But remember, big win today for Norway. For Hungary, just looking for a goal, see if they can find it in their upcoming games, because they do have a big one coming up tomorrow, which we'll once again talk about a little bit later. But then we'll move to the second game of the day, and this was an interesting game, to say the least, with a 2-0 victory for Sweden over Japan. And for Sweden in this tournament, it's been a bit of a roller coaster where we've seen them play really good games and we've seen them play some not so great games. And for Sweden in this one, they played well enough to win, I'll say, but I wouldn't say they played their best game. You think about who they've played. In my eyes, their best game so far in the tournament was their game against Germany. And they can play like that, especially in the quarterfinals, where you're starting to see that third place start to come to fruition, likely seeing either the Finns or the Czechs. Once again, I'll talk about who that's going to be coming in a little bit. But it'll be likely going to be one of those two teams. And for a team, like a Sweden, that's how they need to play against those teams, where they're going to control the pace of play. A defensive-minded team, the Finns and the Czechs, both those teams, although at this tournament they've been a little iffy on that, they do commit to their structure and they play a very structured game of hockey. And that's exactly where Sweden's able to really pick them apart. And we saw, especially in that Germany game, where Sweden picked basically Germany apart on their defensive end. So I'm looking for Sweden to continue that momentum moving on here in this tournament. They got one game left against Norway, and we'll see what's going on in that game. Obviously, they've already locked up now the top spot in Group B, but we'll also see whether or not they're going to start sitting some of their players or giving a little bit more load management to a game that doesn't really mean that much to them in the grand scheme of things. Might be something to keep an eye on there. But nonetheless, here we move on to the third game of the day, because we do have a lot to get to today. With the game I really don't want to talk about, because it is the U.S. and Canada. The U.S. does take this one 2-1, and this was a game that it was a tough one for Canada. They started very flat, is what I'd say. Didn't really have it in the first period and a half. Started to pick up their game a little bit towards the third. Into the third, they started playing well. In the last 5 minutes, you started to see the desperation, minus the last sort of 2 minutes where they got hemmed in their own end. But for this Canadian team, it was a disappointment, I'd say, losing this one to the U.S. Obviously, it's a game circled on the calendar, but at the same time, in the grand scheme of things, this game isn't that important to the standings. Think about who the difference between first place and second place is. You're looking at the difference between Japan, Germany, who are going to play each other for that spot anyway, as well as, maybe throw a Hungary or a Norway in there. In my eyes, it doesn't matter too much for Canada and the U.S. in terms of that game in general in the grand scheme of it. But at the same time, it is a disappointing loss, especially when you're playing for pride. Canada and the U.S. is one of those rivalries where they always do seem to bring their best game against each other. This one, it's no different. And unfortunately for Canada, they just found themselves a little flat off the start, and that was the difference in this game, where the U.S. brought it for the most part for the full 60 minutes. And that really was the difference maker. And we'll see moving forward. Obviously Franco today did play really well. But in a potential rematch, you never know what's the case going to be, because for Canada, there were quite a few defensive lapses on the U.S. side that they seemed to capitalize on, just couldn't sneak it by the goaltender. So we'll see when these two teams hopefully eventually do rematch in the finals, which is what it typically is at this tournament, to see who brings their game. And I think Canada, yes, they got a tough game tomorrow, which we'll talk about, against the Czechs, where it's never an easy out. But I do think looking ahead in this tournament, looking towards the gold medal game, which is what it looks like it might be, that's where it's going to get exciting. So for Canada today, a tough one. For the U.S., a big win. But we'll move on to the news now, starting here with Hungary finding goals. And for Hungary at this tournament, we're going to talk about it in a little bit. I know I keep telling you we're going to talk about it, but we're going to talk about how many goals Hungary needs to score over Germany tomorrow. And it's not going to be an easy road to victory for Hungary tomorrow. And if they want any shot at making it far into this tournament, they want to make the quarterfinals and not get relegated, they're going to have to find the back of the net in bunches. So we'll see what game Hungary comes out with. It's going to be an interesting one, because I think when we look at Hungary as a team, they are a scrappy team, but a team that if they find ways to find the back of the net, they've generated enough chances. I think they're just missing that one touch to create that sort of snowball effect before they start scoring 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And then eventually, of course, in my eyes, they will sort of keep scoring after that. But I think it's just getting the first one will be the tough one for this Hungary team. So for Hungary, yes, it's tough to find goals. They have to find goals if they want any shot at not getting out of the relegation spot in this tournament, but still remains to be seen. As for Norway, with momentum, for Norway, they've played, in my eyes, very well at this tournament. They've slowly but surely been building that momentum. You think their first game where they held a real tight margin, and they just kept sort of building on that. And yes, they weren't winning, but they were finding ways to generate positives from. And they were one of those teams that you could create a lot of positives from, very similarly to how Hungary's playing. They just haven't been able to find the back of the net where Norway has. And coming into this one, I originally did have and predicted that Hungary would take it. But after watching this tournament, seeing the way Norway's been playing and progressively getting better, I had to take Norway because they were just the better team. So for Norway, they're coming up against a tough test with Sweden. We'll see if they can carry their momentum. I think that's going to be a game to watch. I think it's not as set in stone as some people might think, especially depending on which game Sweden brings. Because we've seen Sweden kind of play two ends of the spectrum at this tournament, where they've played very well in the games they have to, and the games that they've sort of written off, they haven't played so well. So for Norway here, they're a team that I'm keeping an eye on. I'm not sure whether or not they will be able to pull off the upset, but nonetheless, it will be an interesting one to watch there. As for Japan, Japan's a team that's always going to fight at this tournament. And they've shown themselves well, especially in the games they played so far. Today was no different. Obviously, going up against a much bigger, more physical Swedish team was tough for them, but they still found ways to battle it out. And honestly, they were close enough that they could have taken that game. So hats off to Japan today. A real well-played game against a tough Swedish team. But speaking of Sweden, they did secure a top spot in Group B, which is obviously big for them, not having to go through a Canada or a U.S. in the quarterfinals, getting to play likely either a Finns or a Czech, depending on the tiebreaker, which is going to be an interesting one there. As for Canada, they did come out flat today. We'll see if they can bounce back coming up against a tough Czech team tomorrow. That's one game I do want to keep an eye on, because if they do come out flat against the Czechs, you're going to see the Czechs dominate play, especially early on in that one, and it's going to be all over for Canada real quickly. As it is tough to come back, especially on home ice against a Czech team. it's a game that I will say is not as set in stone, once again, as people might think. It very well could be a tight game right to the very end, but it also could be a blowout for Canada, something to keep an eye on in that one. As for the U.S., they also did secure top spot in Group A, getting to play the third seed in Group B in the quarterfinals, so a big deal for them as well. Getting to play a little bit easier of an opponent. I don't know how much easier it's going to be, whether you pick Germany or Japan. I don't think it's going to matter too much. I think they're both going to have their way. The U.S. is going to have their way in that game. But nonetheless, here it really could come down to anything. We'll now flip it over to the standings. And in Group A, we do have the U.S., once again, as we talked about, securing the top spot in Group A with 9 points. Canada in second place with 6. Finland and Czechia third and fourth. Remember, Finland does have the tiebreaker over the Czechs for head-to-head with 3 points each. And then Switzerland in last place with no points. In Group B, we have Sweden in first place with 9, Japan in second place with 6, Germany in third with 3, Norway in fourth with 3 as well. Remember, Germany does have the head-to-head tiebreaker over Norway, and Hungary is in last place. Remember, the bottom 2 teams in Group B do get relegated. So lots to play for. Remember, the general tournament format for quarterfinals is A1 plays B3, A2 plays B2, A3 plays B1, and A4 versus A5 do play each other. So obviously lots to play for, especially for these teams. And for Norway, it was a tough game for them today because they needed one more goal. And we'll talk about this now for tomorrow's games. We'll start here in Group B because it's the relegation spot. It's the one everyone wants to know about. And we start here with the head-to-head bracket. So the way it works with three-way tiebreakers is it splits down into a three-way tie. Only the games played between the teams really matter for this. So you can see that here. Germany is in first place with 3 points. Remember, they do have the head-to-head tiebreaker. They also have the goal differential, and then goals for is the third tiebreaker. So the way it works is if you are Hungary here, you think both teams have got 3 goals in this tournament. So the way it's going to work is for Hungary, if they only win by 1 goal to 3 goals, remember goal scoring hasn't been a problem for them at this tournament, Germany will be in third place, and Norway will get second place, and then, of course, Hungary will get third place. Remember, first, second, and third place is really third, fourth, and fifth in Group B, and the fourth and fifth teams do get relegated. And you will see here Norway's not on this list. I'm going to assume that Norway loses to Sweden, and I'm just going to say for basically the record that if Germany wins this game, it's more or less over. If they win in regulation, it doesn't matter what happens in the Norway-Sweden game because Germany does have the tiebreaker, as well as Japan has the tiebreaker over Norway. As well, for Hungary, if Germany does win their game against Japan, and say, for example, they do, the second tiebreaker here is Hungary wins by 4 goals or more, then they get the third spot. If Germany gets a point against Japan, that doesn't matter because Germany's that point above. But also in the same respect, if Norway can find a point against Sweden, they will also move ahead in the standings over Hungary, who only has 1 game left against Germany tomorrow. So that's the breakdown more or less. You're looking for Hungary to win to create the three-way tiebreaker. If it's not, Germany wins the game in regulation, they're automatically the top team in this three-way tiebreaker. They'll be third. As for Hungary, they need to win by 4 goals or more. That's what you're looking for tomorrow, as well as when Norway and Sweden play. If Norway wants any shot at making it into the quarterfinals, they first need Germany to basically lose both their games or at least not win them in regulation. Because as soon as Germany wins a game in regulation, it is over, this three-way tiebreaker, and Norway and Hungary are both relegated from this tournament. So that's what we got here for Group B. We'll now talk about the Group A spot. And very similarly, you think, once again, it comes down to head-to-head points, head-to-head goal differential, and head-to-head points for, or goals for, at this tournament. So we start here. Of course, we think that the standings as of this current moment, Finland does have the tiebreaker over the Czechs because they do have the head-to-head record over them. So if Switzerland only beats Finland by 1 goal tomorrow, the way it's going to work is obviously, you see it in the standings. Finland, once again, will be tied with the Czechs for points 4. And once again, this is only for regulation games. It doesn't matter for other stuff. I'm also going to hold constant the fact that the U.S. and the Swiss, I'm going to assume the U.S. wins in overtime or in regulation, as well as Canada beats the Czechs in regulation as well. That's just sort of something I'm taking as given. But once again, if the Czechs do win, they just have to get more points than the Finns do tomorrow, and they'll move ahead. But Finland does have the head-to-head tiebreaker. So if Finland wins in regulation, this all doesn't really matter. And we'll move on as it was in the tournament. Remember, the Czechs also have the head-to-head tiebreaker over the Swiss. So if Switzerland does win by 1 goal in regulation tomorrow over the Finns, Finland will move to 3rd place, as well as for Switzerland. If Switzerland beats Finland by 2 goals to 4 goals, then you'll see the Czechs in 3rd place. If the Swiss do win by 5 goals or more, then you'll see Switzerland move into the 3rd place spot. So it is not terribly likely we're going to see Switzerland in the 3rd place spot. I don't expect Finland to lose to the Swiss, but it might be interesting to see, especially if that game gets close, how much is Switzerland going to play for, because the truth is, for the Swiss, they're likely going to play the 4th and 5th games if the game's close towards the end of the game. They need to win by 5 goals to be able to play a team in Group B. And then the question remains, would you rather play a team like the Czechs or the Finns rather than a team like Sweden, who's red hot at this tournament? So we'll move now to the games tomorrow with April 14th. We talked about it a little bit, the importance of these games, but Germany versus Hungary, that's the one that I'm keeping an eye on. I don't think it's a set in stone as people think as well. Remember, Hungary needs 4 goals or more, beating Germany by 4 goals or more in order to get to that 3rd spot and get themselves out of relegation, or at least give themselves a chance in the long run, because this is their last game for Hungary. This is going to be everything you're going to see out of them. We'll see if they're able to pull off the 4-0 or a 5-1 or 6-2 upset against Germany. So something to keep an eye on there. I think it's going to become desperation for Hungary tomorrow, especially if they can get out to an early lead. Something to keep an eye on. Second game of the day at 9 a.m. Eastern is between Finland and Switzerland. We talked about the importance of this one. Remember, Finland's looking for a 1-goal game or a win. As for the Swiss, they're looking for 5 goals or more to move into that 3rd place spot. Assuming that, of course, Canada does beat the Czechs and U.S. beats Switzerland, both games in regulation, then Switzerland will need a 5-goal or more win against Finland to move into the 3rd spot. Then to the 3rd game of the day we go with the Czechs and Canada, and this game I think will be a close one. I do expect Canada to still take it, but the truth is the Czechs, the way they've played at this tournament has been a little shaky. I don't know what their best game is going to be, and I also don't know what the best Canada game has been, because I don't think we've seen that at this tournament either yet. So I do think it's going to come down to which team brings their game is really going to determine this one. For the Czechs, obviously you're looking for a point or 2 out of this one, because if you can find a way to knock on the door of Finland, because you guys they're tied right now. So if Switzerland can beat Finland in regulation, then all of a sudden it opens up the door for the Czechs to get a point against Canada and move ahead of them in the standings. So something to keep an eye on there, because 1 game left for Finland, 1 game left for the Czechs. Finland loses to Switzerland regulation. Or if they win in overtime or lose in overtime, then it's up to the Czechs to get more points than Finland to move into that 3rd spot. So lots of what-if scenarios for tomorrow's games, but that will wrap it up for our scheduled programming. We will now move on to our live questions. So we start here with one from Nick, the IIHF fan, who says, Canada cannot be waiting as long as they did to be getting into the game. Sure, they made it interesting, but in my opinion, way too late. Now you're going into a game tomorrow against a Czech team that needs a win just as badly as you do, and with their crowd. On another note, congratulations, Norway, for your first Women's World Championship win since 1994. And I completely agree about the Canada point, because for Canada, they're a frustrating team to watch at this tournament, because they play really, really good games and they play really, really bad games. And it's just a matter of which game they come to play with tomorrow that I think really is going to determine how this game shapes up. And I think for the Czechs, they've shown themselves, especially against the U.S., where if they hang around and they clean their game up, especially on the discipline side, they might still stand a shot at this tournament. So for the Czechs, something to keep an eye on. For Canada, make sure to play a full 60 minutes starting from minute 0 of the first period, or minute 20 on the clock of the first period, because if you don't, it's going to be a very long game for Canada. And as well, congrats to Norway, first championship Women's World Championship win since 1994. Obviously a big deal whenever we get to be a part of renewing history for Norway. So a big win for them, so congrats. But with that, if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. If you'd like to drop a like, if you really consider subscribing, tell all your friends to comment down below your thoughts on Day 5 of the Women's World Championship. Until next time, see you.